How did you distinguish that for yourself? Was that something that has been with you your whole life, or was that part of the process? Like, what tools did you use to understand and distinguish all of those things that you just said?
You mean about like reimagining what my
Yeah,
future is like?
like
Um,
creating it, because you have an amazing story, so you definitely have a lot of tools in your tool chest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess first and foremost, it just comes from like the type of person that I am. I've never been somebody who um, takes takes things, laying down. I guess you can say, like, if I'm faced with a challenge, I'm always like, nobody's gonna get me. I'm gonna do this, And so I just don't want to, I just didn't want to be, I just never wanted to have like a miserable life. I've always gone after the things I wanted. And, I think that the hardest thing for me in this entire thing was not knowing what I wanted. I've always been the type of person who could like laser focus and be like, all right, I'm going to do this. And then I would just go for it. And the biggest struggle and the hardest thing for me was not knowing where I was going or what direction I was moving towards. And, I felt very lost for a while. And so that feeling is what motivated me to find myself, because when you feel lost and you don't know what you want or what you want to do, like the next step is to say, okay, well, if I feel lost, then I need to start finding something. And, I started searching. I just started searching for friends. I mean, not that sounds kind of pathetic, but I started making new friends and like women around me. And I started learning about like female friendships and how valuable they are. I started, kind of invigorating old hobbies and discovering new hobbies that allowed me to fill my time in more positive, constructive ways. I started, dating again, which was like, really great. And also like, you face a lot of like your insecurities. You can work so much on yourself, but like when you have a lot of trauma that's around a relationship, and then you try and have another relationship, there's a lot of like insecurities and feelings that come up while you're like going through that process. So that was, I think that was really beneficial for me because it allowed me to work through some of those feelings. I mean, I can't say that, I'm at the end of my journey. I'm still really kind of at the beginning, kind of middle part of it. But, I think that it was just something inside me told me that there's no way that this is going to define me. And this isn't where my life is going to end. And I think I just decided at a very early point that this was going to be not an ending, but a new beginning for me.
And your story has a lot of that. It has a lot of turning this into an opportunity as opposed to being victim of. What are
Yeah.
some of the things that you did? I know that you've done a bunch of stuff and you created this entire community. You have a lot of people that listen to what you have to say and you contribute, and it's from the heart.
Yeah. I think that there were like actions that I took that allowed me to heal and like progress through my journey. But there was also, I think the most important thing that I learned was to be authentically myself. And I wasn't, and during my marriage and for probably the last, 12 years of my life, not now, but like until 2016, I just wasn't myself. I was trying to be something else. I felt like, I'm from Florida and grew up in a small town, and I always had visions of living in a big city and working in entertainment and being this career woman. And so I kind of relinquished all of my background and moved to a big city. And kind of in my head, I was like, okay, now I'm going to be this girl, this like thing that I imagined in my head. And I became that girl. Like, I guess that's just like who I am. Like when I set my mind to something, I just like do it and I go after it. And then after a while, I think that I realized that that girl that I imagined in my head actually wasn't me. And when I was having problems or I was having issues, I never turned to anybody for support. I always like internalized them, and I didn't want to ever allow anybody to see any of my imperfections. Like I only wanted everybody to see how great my life was, how successful my career was, how amazing my kids were. And I didn't even recognize the bad stuff even in myself or the things that were happening around me. I would just like kind of like brush them off and make excuses and just say, well, this is, accept those things instead of questioning those things. And I think that the biggest thing that I learned was to not live like that. Living in this like quote unquote perfect ideology actually is super damaging and doesn't allow you to have real vulnerable relationships with friends or family or anybody, because you're never really yourself. And for me, when things kind of blew up and I really needed levels of support, I was able to find them because I was honest. I was so broken that like all of those preconceived, protective, perfect things inside me like went out the window, and I was just like blubbering everywhere to anybody who would listen about like how horrible my life was and how I didn't know what was going to happen. And it was that when I started doing that, that's when I really started receiving the benefits of true friendship and really opening myself up to deeper relationships and more authentic communication. And it changed everything. It changed my whole outlook on life. And the more I shared my honest truth, the more it resonated with me and with everybody around me. And so for me, it was like the most important thing is just to be like authentically yourself and not be afraid to share things that are happening with you, with the people around you, because like everybody needs support in life. Everybody needs to be able to say, oh, this really messed up thing happened to me and I don't really even know how to feel about it. And then you can talk about it and you can realize maybe it wasn't so messed up, or maybe it was more messed up than you thought it was. But having that sounding board and at least being able to like recognize and vocalize those feelings and not being afraid of like being judged or what somebody is going to think, or not being quote unquote perfect, like none of that stuff really matters. It doesn't actually even exist. It just is this like thinking that you think in your head, but like nobody's actually doing that. And when you ask for their support, you'll be surprised at what you find once you do it.
How scary is it to be vulnerable?
Oh my gosh, it's so scary. I mean, probably the bravest, scariest thing you can do, in any, like even just being vulnerable in a relationship or with a friendship or on a public platform, just being, and when you're vulnerable, you open yourself up to criticism, and you have to be able to handle that also. And not that I've gotten a lot of it, but I have gotten some, but I also think that when you are speaking from your heart and you are speaking so authentically and honest, that when you receive criticism, it's almost like it becomes your battle shield, because like somebody might criticize you, but when you're speaking from your truth, then you kind of, I don't know how to say, it's almost like this backbone where you're not doubting. For me, I don't really doubt. Like, I know that those feelings are true. So if somebody wants to criticize me about them, well, then that's their kind of thing. But they can't tell me that how I feel is wrong. Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. You have a platform to stand on, so nobody can knock you off, because it's like, this is what I stand for.
Yeah.
So you can have an opinion, and the space to have an opinion and the space to disagree with me can exist. But what will not stop existing is my commitment to what this is.
Yeah. And the commitment to the fact that this is what happened to me and this is how I dealt with it. And these are the feelings that surrounded it. And these are the things that I learned from it. And you can criticize, and somebody can criticize all of those things, but they can't take that away from me. They can't take away my journey, and my story.
Yeah.
Like, so it almost becomes this battle shield that you you can like kind of stand behind, because truth is, and honesty is such a powerful thing. Like it really is, like it really becomes this, this like platform for you to stand on, and I always encourage people to like be authentic and raw and vulnerable, because like that's kind of how, that's kind of like where the basis of like happiness starts.
Yeah. When you commit to yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And everybody always says like, oh, you can't love somebody until you love yourself. And I always really kind of, when somebody would say that, I would always kind of get like a little cringy inside and like kind of roll my eyes internally and be like, whatever, but I never really realized the truth behind those words, because it is so true. Like, I think that a lot of people, myself included, I didn't do the things in my marriage that I could have done to make myself happy, or you taking the time. I had a lot of guilt about, raising children and the amount I needed to be available for them. And I really put myself last on the totem pole, and the one thing that I did learn was really to take some time for myself and to care for myself and really learn the things about myself that make me, and be unapologetically me, even if it means like, like for instance, I have a back patio and I have like I have this like really nice like couch that like looks great, and like a fire pit that looks great. And I take like the beach chairs and I sit them on the porch, and I sit on the beach chair. Like, I don't want to sit on like the fancy couch, because I like the beach chair much better, whereas I used to be like, oh, well, I want to be this like fancy girl, and I want to be this like, so I'm going to sit on the fancy couch. But there comes just a point where you just realize these things, like, I'm not a fancy couch kind of girl. I'm like a beach chair kind of girl, and I prefer to lay in a beach chair, and that is totally okay. And like, you might want to lay on a fancy couch, and that's good. I respect you for liking fancy couches, but for me, I prefer beach chairs, and just kind of being okay with those kinds of things, and unapologetic about it.
I think that you draw up a really valid point. When you're inside the relationship, you do apologize. You do try to compromise and do different things. What would you do differently, knowing what you know now, back in those days? Would you have put yourself first more often? Would that have made a difference?
I mean, I don't have any regrets on how things turned out. So I don't know if it would have made a difference, but I definitely would have changed some things about my behavior for sure. Number one, I would have definitely given myself the opportunity to take care of myself. I had always been, I would always work out, but I just didn't feel good about myself. I didn't take time for myself. There were times that I needed just an hour or two just for myself. And I felt too guilty and shameful. And I made all these excuses in my head, like, oh, well, my ex can't handle the 2 kids, or, oh, I have to be there, or whatever, and I think that as women, like, we kind of become kind of like a bit controlling in our family. Like, everybody needs us, because, originally they really do. But it isn't until, hold on, let me get this. My cat is infiltrating. If you feel like everybody needs you, and so you feel like you always have to be present for everybody at all times, which doesn't allow you to take the time necessary for yourself to create your own happiness, And so I think I would have taken more time for myself to create my own happiness, because I was constantly giving to everybody around me, but I wasn't like pouring back into me. And that created a lot of resentment. Whereas like when my ex-husband would go and do something for himself, I wouldn't look at that like, oh, I'm so glad he's taking care of himself. I would look at that like very resentful and say, he's not here, I have to do everything. You know what I mean? Instead of like planning a birthday party for myself and saying, you know what, this is what I really want to do, and I'm going to make it happen. It's going to be a great day for me. I would like rely on my ex to plan something. I wouldn't communicate what I wanted. I had high expectations, and I was constantly disappointed and vocalized my disappointment on a consistent basis, So I think like the number one thing I would have done was not be afraid to pour back into myself, just like I was pouring into everybody around me. And it would have changed the relationship, the dynamic within the relationship had I done so. And, once you're divorced, at least for me, my ex ended up taking the kids pretty much, half the time right from the jump. So, these fears that I had of like, he can't handle it, or, they need me. It's like all of a sudden you realize like, oh crap, like it doesn't matter any of these things. A, they're not true. And B, now I don't even get a choice in it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I wish that I would have like helped. I was taking away from his relationship from his kids. Mind you, he could have also been more proactive, but I was taking away from the relationship that he could have had with his kids by being like that, So I definitely would have done that. The other thing I would have done is I would have stopped asking for permission on the big life choices that I wanted to make for myself. There were times that I was working and I was super unhappy and I wanted to quit, and I would go to my ex-husband and I would say, I hate this. I really want to, want to do this, or I want to like change gears and I want to like try a different career path. And I felt like I had to ask him permission. And when he didn't give me that permission, I was like, felt defeated. And I like kind of took on a victim mentality of like, I'm not allowed to do this. And in hindsight, like, I wish I just would have done it. I wish I would have taken more power in the relationship and said, you know what? No, I'm not going to ask you. This is what I'm going to do. And that probably would have led to more, probably more arguments and in a different direction. Maybe would have led us in the same direction. Yeah. But I just wish I would have kind of taken just more ownership of my life and myself and not be so like sacrificial in all of it.
That's a wrap on another episode of Divorce the First 6 Months. Don't forget to hit subscribe for more insights. Take care.